Welcome to the Literacy Collaborative's sixth presentation. Tonight we're going to speak about writing. I'd like to begin by saying that we acknowledge that our work takes place on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Indigenous peoples across what is now called British Columbia. We recognize these lands are home to many distinct First Nations, each with their own languages and cultures. In the chat, please take a moment to share your location or your own land acknowledgement. I'm joining you today from Kelowna on the land of the Okanagan Nation Alliance, which is the tribal council for the member communities of the Silks Nation across a large area of what is now known as the interior of British Columbia and Washington State in the US. In the chat, we've placed a link to their YouTube channel that contains many resources and information for you to explore. The language in this territory is in Silshan. I invite you to listen to words spoken in the language on firstvoices.com. The plan for this afternoon's session is welcoming you. In a moment, we will do some introductions and announce the draw prize winner. We'll build a shared understanding. Then we'll connect that to evidence-informed instruction. We'll spend time talking and sharing together, and we'll end the day with another survey for a chance to win a prize. So I'm Danielle Neer, and I'm currently a reading intervention specialist in Central Okanagan here in Kelowna. After serving on the LADA Executive Committee for over 10 years, I've moved on to networking with educators around the province as the co-founder of the BC Literacy Coalition here with my colleague, Angelo.
Hi, my name is Angelo Graffos, and I have worked in the Coquitlam School District as a classroom teacher and learning support teacher, and as a classroom teacher in the Catholic school system where I'm currently working. Literacy is a huge passion of mine where I'm currently pursuing some graduate level work in the science of reading, and also help found the BC Literacy Coalition along with my co-presenter today from the Literacy Collaborative, Danielle Neer. Outside of work, I enjoy spending time with my fiance, family, and friends. Very happy to be here and looking forward to discussing writing. So last week's lucky winner is Becky Wall. Congratulations on winning the book titled Know Better, Do Better, Comprehension, Fueling the Reading Brain with Knowledge, Vocabulary, and Rich Language by David Libin and Meredith Libin. Dyslexia Canada will contact you soon via email. Before we jump into writing, let's anchor ourselves in the learning progressions. The link to the progressions will be put into the chat by one of our co-hosts. And as we talked about in previous sessions, the learning progressions are aligned with the BC English Language Arts curriculum. They describe what end-of-year proficiency looks like for each grade level, and importantly, they were developed by BC teachers. Under the writing section of the document, it says that writing allows students to demonstrate their learning and communicate their thoughts in unique and expressive ways. Handwriting instructions should ensure accurate letter formation and spacing. Students should receive regular practice, 5 to 10 minutes a day, to build automaticity, which reduces cognitive load and frees up the brain to think about word choice, conventions, and sentence formation. Writing instruction should focus on the joy of writing while naturally reinforcing reading and phonics instruction, and begin with explicitly teaching sentence, then paragraph construction. Composition of text can take many shapes, including a focus on narrative, persuasive, informational or expository, and opinion genres. There are two skills to be developed for writing: printing and composition. There is a descriptor of each of these skills, and then we have a grade-based description for each of the two skills. For printing, from proper pencil grip and printing of letters in kindergarten to legible handwriting in grade 4, and for composition, from drawing pictures and writing 1 to 2 simple sentences in kindergarten to writing different types of sentences organized into a paragraph for grade 4. And a reminder that all the definitions for important terms are found at the end of this document. This next section is designed to get us on the same page, and we will spend some time clarifying key language and concepts so that we have a shared understanding. Let's begin with something relatively simple. The Simple View of Writing is a theoretical framework conceptualized in 2002 by Virginia Berninger and other researchers that captures skilled writing as the product of two necessary sets of skills: lower level transcription skills like handwriting, keyboarding, and spelling, and text generation, which encompasses word, sentence, and text level writing. This quote unquote simple view of writing was based on and sounds very similar to another literacy related framework that we've talked about before, the quote unquote simple view of reading, which was developed by Goff and Tunmer in 1986. This model, the simple view of writing, is useful for doing what its name implies, providing a simple view of what is necessary for skilled writing. If students have amazing ideas and a way with words, but their paper is illegible and or littered with misspelled words, the intended message may be partially or wholly obscured. On the other hand, if students have beautiful handwriting and excellent spelling, but they struggle with text generation, perhaps producing a series of fragments and run-ons with imprecise vocabulary and no clear organizational structure or focus, the quality of the composition is negatively impacted. As it relates to classroom instruction and interventions, the simple view of writing makes a lot of practical sense. And it's helpful because it helps us break down elements of writing that are teachable and actionable. Transcription and text generation are absolutely essential components, but it's also important to recognize that skilled writing, in actuality, is a little more complicated than just transcription and text generation, which we'll see in the next slide. As a result, the not so simple view of writing was developed by the same researcher, Virginia Berninger, in 2006, to expand upon the original framework by adding and emphasizing the role of cognitive processes. Notice that in this model, transcription and executive function serve as the foundation. This model recognizes that students need sufficient transcription skills, and they also need sufficient executive functioning skills, such as strategies for self-regulation, planning and revising, in order to allocate a greater proportion of their working memory to higher level text generation skills. As transcription becomes more automatic, more working memory is freed up or becomes available for higher level writing skills. When students are given an organized plan for writing, then there is less demand on their mental processes, thereby reducing cognitive load and increasing learning. When students lack sufficient transcription skills and or lack executive functioning skills, this taxes working memory and impedes text generation, resulting in diminished writing performance. After describing the not so simple view of writing and the recursive writing process, a quote from Louisa Moats nicely summarizes these important concepts. Writing is a mental juggling act that requires simultaneous and alternating attention to idea generation, planning and organization, translation of ideas into language, transcription of language into print, and the cognitive flexibility that allows editing and revision. Because of this great juggling act, there can be multiple areas of writing difficulty experienced by students, and we'll explain them in more detail on the next slide and throughout this presentation. The not so simple view of writing aligns with research from Rouse 2019 examining areas of writing difficulty for students with disabilities. But it is still critical to note that these areas of writing difficulty are also red flags for many other learners in the classroom. Findings from this research indicate that there are 4 areas of difficulty: transcription, as shown on the screen, sentence level writing, text generation, and motivation. In the first area of difficulty, transcription, there are 3 subskills. For the first subskill of handwriting, students with disabilities tend to have difficulty with accuracy and legibility. Students with disabilities have trouble learning and forming legible letters with automaticity and ease. They tend to write slowly, many times letter by letter or stroke by stroke. For the second subskill of typing, students with disabilities tend to have difficulty with accuracy and speed. And finally, the third subskill of spelling, students tend to have difficulty with accuracy and automaticity, making more spelling mistakes in their written compositions than their peers without disabilities. In general, handwriting can be fatiguing, and a focus on spelling can be cognitively demanding. Students with disabilities struggle with writing fluency. They often take excessive amounts of time to complete writing tasks, produce written assignments that are relatively short, and or stop writing prematurely. all of which can have negative impacts on their writing quality. The second area of writing difficulty is sentence level writing. When constructing a sentence, students make lexical choices, i.e., choosing specific words for a particular effect. They make syntactical choices, for example, using different clauses as part of each sentence's structure. They make mechanical choices, like when they use punctuation, like choosing between a semicolon versus a colon. And they make rhetorical choices, like parallelism, allusion, hyperbole, metaphor, and other figurative language. In addition to all these considerations, students must also ensure that the sentence makes sense within the general context of the composition already written. Students with disabilities typically generate shorter and less syntactically complex sentences and have more grammatical errors than students without disabilities. For text generation, the third area of writing difficulty, skilled writers typically plan, which includes setting goals, generating ideas, and organizing ideas. They revise and edit, like when they attend to the details or elaborations of the propositions or ideas within the text, and also the connections between ideas within and between sentences. And skilled writers also undergo perspective taking, for example, ensuring that the text is tailored to a specific audience, so using the appropriate language. Instead of following a process that involves planning, revising, and perspective taking or reflection, students with disabilities tend to think writing as a process whereby they generate as much content as possible on a particular topic. Writing pieces are an expression of what they know, with little to no connections between sentences, and with form and style not usually align with the intended audience. And finally, the last area of writing difficulty, motivation. Being highly motivated to engage in the complex task of writing includes valuing writing and believing that it has relevance, possessing self-efficacy or confidence in one's writing abilities, and being able to persist when certain aspects of a writing task become difficult or seem insurmountable. Research shows that in order to juggle the many cognitive demands imposed by writing and the frustrations that can come with the process, skilled writers must be motivated and must think writing is important enough to continue with the process when certain aspects become difficult, for example, not accurately articulating one's thoughts onto paper. Compared to students with disabilities tend to have difficulty sustaining effort while writing, and the task is not as personally relevant or important to them. Yet, research indicates that these same students tend to believe in their writing abilities, i.e., have high self-efficacy, despite their weaknesses in writing knowledge, skills, and performance. This overconfidence may explain why they have difficulty sustaining effort during writing tasks, as the cognitive resources and effort needed to successfully compose sentences, paragraphs, and texts may be underestimated. While all four areas, transcription, sentence level writing, text generation, and motivation, are essential to writing, you notice that two columns are highlighted because an evidence-based instructional approach called SRSD, which stands for Self-Regulated Strategy Development, primarily addresses students' challenges with text generation through planning, revising, and editing, as well as motivation through the support of self-regulatory strategies and self-talk. We will spend more time later in the presentation talking about the particulars and the practical implications of this instructional approach, and also how other instructional approaches can also address areas of writing difficulty for students with disabilities. As is the case for all the areas of the K-4 foundational learning progressions, spelling underlies both of the writing skills, printing and composition. In the learning progressions document, looking at the descriptor of each skill, printing is defined as the formation of letters by hand, both upper and lowercase, including appropriate spacing, strokes, directionality, and size. And composition is defined as the formation of words, sentences, and paragraphs to create a written piece of text, either fiction or nonfiction, with appropriate grammar and mechanics. There is printing and composition, but what about cursive writing and keyboarding? You may be wondering about the importance and relevance of cursive writing and keyboarding to the curriculum. Later in the presentation, a video of Joan Sedita will be shown where she will speak to the difference between printing, cursive, and keyboarding. Overall, we have seen that the process of writing is not that simple after all, as it involves a multitude of factors like transcription, executive functioning, and working memory to generate text. And because the process is not a simple straight line from planning to text generation and is instead recursive, it makes sense that there can be multiple areas of writing difficulty as we discussed for such a complex task. This excerpt from the learning progressions, students should receive regular practice 5 to 10 minutes a day to build automaticity, which reduces cognitive load and frees up the brain to think about word choice, conventions, and sentence formation, reminds us of the not so simple view of writing and the importance of educators making the writing process easier for students. The following slides will provide strategies to help with the multiple areas of difficulty and cognitive load associated with the writing process.
Thank you, Angelo. As is the case for all of the Literacy Collaborative's presentations, we'll provide a few ideas into which you can dig deeper at a later time. We'll also share the resources in a follow-up email after today's presentation. So from the research, we know, and as Angelo mentioned, it's important to provide daily time for students to write. It's important to teach students to use the writing process for a variety of purposes, and we'll talk about that again in a little while. It's important to teach students to become fluent with handwriting, spelling, sentence construction, typing, and word processing. And we seek to create an engaged community of writers. So let's talk about the building blocks of all writing, letter formation. In addition to learning how to generate specific shapes, graphemes, students learn during handwriting instruction that letters and their corresponding shapes represent specific sounds, also known as phonemes. By starting at the letter level, we see the continuum of development as just that, a continuum of increasing complexity. So the question is handwriting important? Here we'll hear from Joan Sedita about how handwriting includes both printing and cursive. She acknowledges that there is considerable disagreement among teachers about the kind of script that students should learn. Graham in 2009-2010 noted that in the United States, children typically learn both print or manuscript and cursive, with print taught in kindergarten through grade 2 and cursive introduced in grade 3. He also noted that research does not provide a definite answer on the relative effectiveness of scripts, but suggested that instruction should start with print in the primary grades. Berninger, whom we've heard about earlier, noted that research supports teaching both formats and then letting students choose which one works best for them. She explained that print, which is similar to the text in books, might show the most transfer to reading, but that students need to be able to read others' handwriting. Here we'll listen to Joan Sedita on this topic.
Let's talk about handwriting and/or keyboarding. If you want to get something out on paper, you have to be able to write it. You also have to be able to spell it. But even if you know how to spell the word, you have to be able to get those letters down on the paper. And if students of any age have to put too much energy into thinking about how to form those letters, it's going to take energy away from the critical thinking parts of being able to write. Now, there's a lot of research out there that shows that students, by the time they're in 4th grade, if they're not fluent with that handwriting and spending too much energy, it really affects the quality of their writing, of their composing. Now, there's uncertainty. There's no set answer to the question about should it be cursive, should it be manuscript, but we do know that whichever it is, students have to become fluent in that. Now, let's also make the connection to keyboarding or typing. Very young children they're not developmentally able to do the kind of, keyboarding that adults and older students can, but they can hunt and peck. Once students hit about 5th or 6th grade, they're developmentally more able to do the keyboarding. So, and there's great debate over whether we should spend time with handwriting or go right to keyboarding. I'm not here to answer that question. I do believe that for elementary children in particular, there's also so much research that shows that if students are learning to handwrite the letters at the same time that they're learning the letter sound correspondences, that improves the letter writing, and it also improves the alphabetic knowledge that they're developing during a phonics lesson. So for lots of reasons, the ability to be fluent in that transcription skill of handwriting and or keyboarding is absolutely essential.
Excellent. So, as was just shared, it's a complex process. Students need to recall the mental representation of the letter. They need to retrieve the sequence of movements to form that letter. They need to reproduce or form the letter using fine motor and visual motor skills. And they need to repeat. They need to do this again and again, practicing writing the letter repeatedly to build fluency. As is the case for reading, our goal is fluency and legibility. So in summary, there are three key components in handwriting instruction: modeling and description, where we have explicit modeling of how to form those letters, efficient sequence of strokes, and verbalizing directions to create a script in their head for how to form that letter. That support fades as the formation becomes proficient. We also have practice. As Angelo mentioned, 5 to 10 minutes per day, 5 to 10 opportunities immediately after modeling, size and alignment, slant activities, the link to meaningful activities or real writing activities. And third, we have evaluation and feedback. So it's really important that students participate in identifying the best letter that they have. Ask the child to look over a row and select what they think is their best letter. Talk about what makes it their choice and give criteria to help them understand why you agree or disagree with their choice. Self-monitoring skills, ask them to notice when they're getting off track and to help to pause and get back to correctly forming their letters. Giving error correction immediately until the students are doing that themselves. And targeted praise to encourage and to build their confidence. It's important that there are no comparisons. They don't need to compare their work against others, but against criteria for what good handwriting looks like, because handwriting differs for each person. Here's a resource that comes from the University of Iowa. It's called Lifter, and it's a little bit of a complex page to find where the tools are, but as you'll see, we've got the main page will have the letters, and you click on the letter you're wanting to focus on. Then you click on See Materials. It's up, you have to scroll back up to the top, and it's on the right-hand side. It'll say See Materials. Then you click on the down arrow on the far right to access the videos and other resources, such as a printing page and blank lined pages. There is also a cursive option of this called Clifter, and it's from the same site from the University of Iowa. So let's take a look at the letter formation. Repeated practice and a script, starting from the top, big line down, pick up the pencil, little line over, little line down. And you'll see in this video, you can have this projected and running over and over again. As students do their printing practice, it's being modeled. They can see it again and again. There are arrows to guide direction. There are colors to really show those lines. It's helpful if you add in a script, like big line down is something that Handwriting Without Tears uses. And a word associated with that sound. So we also know many classrooms in British Columbia are using University of Florida Literacy Institute. And the UFly slide deck up until about lesson 35 has letters as part of the introduction of the phonemes, because with phonemes, you've got the articulatory gesture or how you're making that sound in your mouth, but also how you draw this. And while this slide is not animated in the UFly slide decks, they are. I've selected to show the K because this letter has so many things to consider when forming it. Students need to start at the top with the big line down. They need to stop at the bottom and not go too far. Then the pencil needs to be picked up, moved a little bit away from the larger line, but not to the top and only about halfway along. So there are lots of pieces to consider. And the child needs to consider about how far away. Once they've put their pencil down, then they need to move toward the large line to meet it about halfway between where they started this second part and the bottom of the large line. It's a really complex process. And once they've made contact with the larger line, then they need to move back out toward the bottom line. So students who are proficient at letter formation no longer think about all of these steps. These movements have become implicit and are done without thinking. They've achieved muscle memory. But those who struggle take longer to do these tasks. They're less likely to complete assigned activities in the allocated time, and then they fall farther and farther behind. One thing that has been helpful for some of my students is to tell them to look where they want their pencil to go. I draw a little eye to show where to look. So I tell them, put your pencil in the paper, and then at the bottom, I draw a little eyeball, a really quick little circle. Then we talk about picking up your pencil, putting it here. I put a dot or some kind of indicator to help them until that becomes more natural for them. I put it where they're supposed to look for their line to go, and again, an eyeball to look for where they're supposed to go. As with all scaffolds, these cues will no longer be needed once mastery is achieved. And as Angelo mentioned, cursive writing requires explicit instruction to make letter fluent and automatic as well. So some of the hot topics that come up in handwriting, we've got what about a scope and sequence? So Printing Like a Pro is another resource that we've put into the chat. They group letters according to how they are formed. Question about teaching uppercase or lowercase. I focus my time on lowercase because they're more prominent, they're more often going to be in the text. What about those who worry that these tasks are boring or not inspiring to students? We do know that rote work is needed to create the muscle memory. Findings from research supports that spatiotemporal pattern from visual with our eyes and proprioceptive with our bodies. That information is obtained through precisely controlled hand movements when using a pen, and it contributes extensively to the brain's connectivity patterns that promote learning. We know that neurons that fire together wire together. The next question is about assessing handwriting. So there is a great resource on Lifter called Handwriting Assessments. And the next slide highlights the key components of handwriting that we're looking for when we're checking if students are meeting those targets. So some of the key components are formation. We've got consideration also of size, alignment, spacing, and slant, especially with cursive. That becomes a big part of the cursive handwriting. So now, next along the continuum between letter formation and sentence construction is word formation. I invite you to review the previous webinars my colleagues and I have crafted as we shared more in-depth information about word level construction through oral language, phonics, and morphology. So the next level along the continuum, the next level of complexity is the creation of sentences. Sentences are the building blocks of all writing. So grammar drills alone, as we remember from our previous webinar on oral language, grammar drills alone don't improve the quality of writing. Students' writing improves when they are explicitly taught sentence combining activities, and they use these sentences to communicate ideas. Grammar and conventions should be embedded into sentence composition. So one of the tasks that you may remember from the oral language webinar, we looked at these passages taken out of a story, and in this case, Omu and she can be replaced to put these two simple sentences into a more complex sentence. So here we've taken these two simple sentences and combined them using a subordinating conjunction, and that is although. The result is the creation of a more complex sentence. When we teach students to recognize and to use these sentences, it improves their writing clarity and it improves their reading comprehension. Here we have some other examples of subordinating conjunctions that students can start to use when combining simple sentences. In my classroom, I have been using some of the work by Dr. Abby Allen of the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. she has generously shared all program resources for use by BC teachers. The link to her shared Google Drive is in the chat. The scripted program can be modified for teacher use. In exchange for use of this program, Dr. Allen has asked that you consider sending feedback on the use of her materials along with the feedback on the feedback form, which is contained in their folder. One thing to note is that several of our program's materials have photographs alongside the word prompts, and these photographs don't photocopy well more than once or twice. I've modified her pages. In my example page here, you can see the basic building blocks of the sentence, a subject or noun, and the predicate verb. In this process, students say their sentence out loud. That's the thinking part and the planning part. Then they write it, and then they check for the criteria using caps or capital at the beginning and nowhere else, unless it's a proper noun. Understanding, am I missing any words? Have I added words that don't belong? Are the verb tenses correct? Depending on what you've taught your students. Punctuation and spelling. And you can see here there's a checklist for students to follow along after they have finished writing their sentence. Eventually, this checklist will not need to be there. It will be part of their internal script when checking their sentences. Here you'll see a more advanced version of sentence composition. The student sentence will now include a where word and an adjective. Each of these new concepts will have been taught prior to the independent work on this page. Other sources for this work are Big Sentences for Little Learners from the OnLit page, and Grammar, or it's now called Grammar/Syntax Project, which is now called Okra Education. So here's an example or a sample of what one of my students wrote. The target words were fell, which is kind of tricky. It's a past tense irregular verb of fall, and the word pen. So the word pen can mean two different nouns, a tool for writing or an animal enclosure. This opens up opportunity for a great discussion about homophones. By asking the students to say the sentence aloud before they start, it allows them to leverage their intact oral language skills. While we know this is not the case for language learners or for children with a developmental language delay, but in those cases, the adult can help them to formulate a grammatically correct sentence before they start writing. This checklist is only needed until these steps have become an integral part of a child's self-talk, as I mentioned earlier. Here, I ask the child to make a line for each word when she's saying the sentence out loud. These lines act as a holder or a marker for her to remember her sentence as she writes it. When rereading her sentence, she will notice if an additional word is added or if a word is missing, based on how many lines are left, or if a line is there without a word on it. In the latter case, this often results in a grammatically incorrect sentence, such as the dogs run the big park. Got a word missing there. And that would be shown by having an extra line. So once letter, word, and sentence level learning has started, then students can use these skills to create lengthier text, paragraphs, essays, and responses. So let's look at 3 frameworks that provide coherent instructional opportunities for teaching writing for a variety of purposes. That's where we're going to dig into right now. So content area writing is a powerful way to make writing meaningful and full of learning opportunities. There are many options for teachers to use when teaching writing, which leads to many different approaches shared with students. The result for vulnerable learners could be more confusion in the task of how to write lengthier pieces of work. In some cases, teachers will rely on the use of a graphic organizer to support struggling writers. However, it is important to see a graphic organizer as a tool or support within a framework. Without a framework, the student cannot transfer the technique into her writing strategies more broadly. So let's briefly look at 3 frameworks. Think SRSD, which is now called Releasing Writers, The Writing Rope by Joan Sedita, and Writing Revolution. So when we're looking at one way to teach the writing process is to use a framework previously referred to as Think SRSD, but the name has recently been changed, as I mentioned, to Releasing Writers. It was initially developed by Dr. Karen Harris, Dr. Steve Graham, and colleagues in 1982, but it has since been refined over the years, most notably by Leslie Laud and Pooja Patel in 2006. In this branded approach, students are explicitly taught clear and simple strategies to develop their writing while weaving self-regulation strategies such as planning and monitoring their progress throughout the writing process. While we don't have time for an in-depth discussion of this instructional strategy today, we will review the key components of this flexible and adaptable framework that works with any curriculum. If you'd like more information, we invite you to review the webinar on this topic on the Onlit site. There are assessment tasks and French language versions available on the Think SRSD website. And something to keep in mind is that there are many steps in this framework. It's important that students learn how to look for these markers in texts that they are reading. The first step, which we'll talk about next, helps students to find these markers in others' writing. So there are 3 components for the P stage in this POWER acronym. So the framework starts with the 3 Ps: pre-read for a gist, pull apart the prompt, and pick ideas. The 3 Ps are actionable steps within the planning phase designed to prepare students for writing. When they pre-read for a gist, they look through a mentor text. When they pull apart the prompt, they figure out what it is that they're actually supposed to do. And then when they pick ideas, they really dig into the thinking and planning part of their stories. So let's look at the first P, pre-reading for gist statement, which stands for generating. Gist stands for generating interactions between schemata, things that we know, and texts. So to prepare, teachers will select a mentor text. They'll read mentor text and annotate the text in order to create a gist statement. In our last session on comprehension, we had a chance to work in the breakout rooms on creating a gist statement. And the components of, and we also see the different components of crafting a great sentence. That is, the syntactic components are captured in this chart through scaffolding. Directions are given to include the key parts of a sentence: the who or what, the noun, in this case, the subject, in this case, the scientist, that's the subject of the sentence. Did what, the verb, that's the predicate of the sentence. And then we can have further details added to the sentence, like when, where, some adjectives. Students can expand information to craft a more complex sentence by using coordinating conjunctions or joiner words such as because, adding additional nouns and additional verbs that map onto those other parts of their sentence. So the gist statement could now read, scientists are able to classify animals into 3 different groups because different animals eat different foods. This is a great lead or hook or topic sentence. It gets the reader engaged in the idea and leaves them wanting to find more out about how an animal's diet can help scientists classify animals. In early years, this could be reduced to just the who and what and did what. You can differentiate these tasks for learners by adding or taking off syntactic components. So the second part of P is for students to pull apart the text using a teacher-provided prompt. The Think SRSD website has many examples for you to draw on. Students need to clarify what they're supposed to do and the corresponding content and the what. What are they to explain? These clarify the expectations of the assignment. In this case, the prompt was to identify the do, which is the do, and an animal for each category is the what. So the third P in this framework is for students to pick ideas. This provides the student with a clear path for their writing. They can use sentence starters, such as those provided in the document. We'll link into the chat. Students can list main ideas and order them on text or planner, or use a T-chart to compare if comparing 2 different topics. So what we're going to end up figuring out is the O in the POWER acronym. And the acronym, another additional acronym that's used is where students can organize using TIDE, L, or C space, depending on the type of the task. So T is used for topic introduction. I is for important evidence. D is for detailed examination. And E is for end, or the concluding part of their story, of their essay or piece of work. L you can add in, which is a way to integrate explicit vocabulary instruction into the process. And if the work is a piece of fiction, then you can use the acronym C space for fictional writing. It's used to map fiction ahead of using it for themselves to construct their own fictional texts. So teachers can differentiate by working toward TIDE L by building into each area before moving to include the next. So, for example, teachers can spend time just working on topic and introduction. On the ThinkSRSD website, there are many variations of the Tide L and C space organizers. The scaffolds or graphic organizers are meant to be used only until the process has become an integral part of student writing. Choose one that works for you and remain consistent with it. Consistency is key. So now we move into the write more and exemplars, the W in the POWER acronym. Exemplars drive writing. The Empower Writing website offers sample texts for different grades. Sorry, the Releasing Writers website offers sample texts for different grades. Over time, teachers will construct a bank of exemplars from student writing to use with their students. In this stage, students annotate text to find key markers. This brings awareness to how authors use these features within their own text so that students can use them in their own writing when they go to write. So color coding can really help to see the key components of a text. So here we've used blue for the introduction. We've used orange for important facts. We've used peach for some details or examining some additional pieces of information. And we've used pink for conclusion. This is going beyond using mentor text to inspire. It's using them to think deeply about what makes the mentor text a rich source of information that we can first replicate in our own writing and then move beyond to make our own writing unique and powerful. The goal is to demystify text by sharing markers of what makes a good text. This step can be criterion-based, which supports them later evaluating their own writing. Goal setting strengthens student agency through targeted feedback and active participation in analysis of their own and their peers' work. So now we get to the E and R in the acronym POWER. So edit is intentionally smaller because revise is the key or the really important part of this process. Students edit and revise their own work using the same color coding as they use for the mentor text. So teaching editing of student work is complex. We embed this process in all levels of writing, at the letter level with effective letter formation, at the word level with encoding practice, and you can see our phonics and morphology webinars for more on this. At the sentence level, which we discussed earlier and in our first webinar on oral language, and at the text level, where the entire writing piece is analyzed for key components such as topic, sentence, supporting details or evidence, and a conclusion. The next two writing frameworks share some of the key components, but differ slightly in their approach. Trust the process. The document we will post in the chat may support you in seeing all of these parts together. So another framework for teaching the writing process is the writing rope by Joan Sedita. As Sedita notes in the introduction to the book, The Writing Rope, not only do students use writing to communicate, but writing also improves their reading comprehension. With a nod toward Hollis Scarborough's 2001 reading rope, Sedita developed a model that identifies 5 components that are necessary for skilled writing. The rope organizes multiple writing skills, strategies, and techniques into 5 components that represent the elements of a comprehensive writing curriculum. These 5 components are critical thinking, syntax, text structure, writing craft, and transcription. Within each component, Sedita provides instructional strategies to develop proficient writers. While not explicitly on the topic of writing rope, join Angelo and I for a discussion with Joan Sedita on April 13th as part of our discussion about adolescent literacy. So let's take a look at the transcription section of the writing rope. It addresses, as we've mentioned, and as Angela mentioned, spelling, handwriting, and keyboarding. And we did hear from Joan Sedita on the importance of this skill earlier in today's presentation. The next section on the writing rope speaks to writing craft. It refers to word choice, awareness of task, audience, and purpose, and literary devices. The text structure component includes discussion on 3 types of text genres: narrative, informational, and opinion. While Reading Rockets and other research lists more than these 3, but for simplicity, these 3 work to organize our instructional practice. speaks about paragraph structure, explicitly teaching about 3 types of sentences in a paragraph: the topic sentence, as we heard from Think SRSD, supporting sentences, and concluding sentence, again shared with releasing writers. And students can color code these similarly to find them in mentor texts. And by analyzing the selected text, students learn about well-constructed paragraphs. Text structure also includes patterns of organization, which would be description, sequence, cause and effect, compare contrast type stories, problem solution. Sedita provides paragraph templates as supports for students who need it when constructing a paragraph. Much like the sentence template I shared earlier, these templates allow students to be successful with constructing a paragraph. By focusing on building a single paragraph, the templates reinforce for students that text is built 1 sentence and 1 paragraph at a time. Also in this area is linking and transition words. We also saw that when we were talking about gist statements. We saw that when we were talking about taking 2 simple sentences and combining them to make a more complex sentence. It could also in this area could be where you dig in to teach students of how to move away from overused words such as first, then, next. In the Writing Rope book, Sedita provides a 2-column chart with transition words and phrases organized by purpose. For example, if you want to state the obvious in your work, you can use words like certainly or granted that instead of so, which is a very common word used by students. So the next area of the Writing Rope is the syntax. This addresses grammar and syntactic awareness, sentence elaboration, and punctuation. Sedita includes many activities to teach sentence basics. One that I love are sentence scrambles. The teacher gives the students a set of words from a sentence that are out of order. Individuals, pairs, or small groups of students can rearrange the words into a grammatically correct sentence without deleting or adding any words. This task can be made easier if one of the words is capitalized, and that's the word that's intended to be the first word. And if one word includes a punctuation, which would be the word that's intended to be the final word in the sentence. Using sentences related to content areas allows this work to be embedded in time allocated to other curriculum areas. For example, if the class is studying force and motion, then the following sentences can be written out on a paper strip, cut up, and given to students or groups of students to be arranged into a grammatically correct sentence. So if we're talking about grade 2, in science, force and motion, the big idea is that forces influence the motion of an object. That would be a great sentence that's cut up into words and the students rearrange it into the sentence, also learning about the content. The way different objects fall depends on their shape. That's also in the science curriculum. Objects move differently in different materials, again, from our science curriculum. And pumpkins float and a coin sinks in water, again, mapping on to science curriculum. Another activity that maps onto what was discussed earlier is teaching sentence combining, as I mentioned, and those joiner words. And the final, but all these other areas rely on this component, is critical thinking. It includes the planning and writing, from generating ideas and gathering information to the specific processes of writing, such as organizing, drafting, writing, and revising. Sedita proposes a 4-stage model for teaching the writing process: think, plan, write, revise, similar to POWER acronym. So we saw that in Think SRSD, or releasing writers, that it's a recursive process. I really love what Sedita recommends that students should spend, the amount of time they should spend in these different areas. She recommends 40% of the time in reading, gathering ideas and information, and taking notes in the think and plan stages, 20% of their time writing a draft, and 40% of the time rewriting and revising, including editing. Explicit instruction and lots of practice need to be established to shift student work habits in writing. In my experience, most of my students will spend 90% of their time just on the writing. Getting them to edit and rework their sentences and paragraphs and longer pieces of work is really takes a lot of practice and a lot of explicit instruction. The third framework being used in some BC classrooms is The Writing Revolution by Judith C. Hochman and Natalie Wexler. As has been mentioned in previous webinars, the best way to teach grammar and conventions of English is to do it in the context of their writing, particularly sentence activities. This framework offers instructional suggestions for basic sentence level composition, including working from basic sentence structures and moving toward expanding sentences into compound or complex sentences, as we've heard before. As we've seen from the other two frameworks, planning is the first stage. The Writing Revolution framework offers a single paragraph outline whereby details can be added after the basic outline has been crafted. Moving ahead into a multi-paragraph outline leads into lengthier expository, narrative, or persuasive or argumentative text composition. Ideally, a school would select one framework and use this framework across all grades. Students benefit from having a consistent framework and consistent language to help them develop their writing skills.
We invite you to share your feedback for this presentation. We have put the feedback link into the chat. And by submitting feedback, your name will be entered to win this book, Writing Better: Effective Strategies for Teaching Students with Learning Difficulties by Steve Graham and Karen Harris. The winner will be announced at our next session. Speaking of our next session, we will be back on April 8th for our last session with Danielle, myself, Calico, Kathy, and invited guests to share examples of how the learning progressions live in classrooms around BC. That's a wrap for today. We hope we are able to ignite curiosity for further learning on writing. Thank you to everyone for participating. Thank you so much to my co-host Danielle, and a big thank you to Dyslexia Canada for bringing all of us together.
Thank you.